Hello and welcome to this special series on technical writing. Today we are talking about narrative writing. A narrative is a moving picture. Like descriptions, narratives need to have a rich texture of details so that the reader is seeing, hearing, smelling and touching. The reader should experience the story, not simply hear it. Stories add the element of time to description. Often stories start at the beginning and then follow the sequence of event chronologically. However, an effective variation on this pattern is to start in the middle of things and then use flashbacks to fill in the background information. This method is especially effective in holding the reader's attention. There are two extremes you want to avoid in writing a narrative. First, you can simply tell the story event by event without giving it any texture because you leave out descriptive details and dialogues. At the opposite extreme is a narrative that attempts to tell everything, painting detailed descriptions of every scene, quoting everything that is said, even speculating about the thoughts of the characters. A good narrative has texture, but it is suggestive rather than exhaustive. After all, the reader's imagination needs some room to fill in details. Giving too many details not only overwhelms the reader's imagination, it also slows the pace of the narrative. Pacing is an important concept in narrative writing. Basically, pacing means that the writer sometimes slows down the pace by putting more details in, but sometimes also hurries over details. A good way to know where to put in details and where to leave them out is to think of a narrative as consisting of episodes, that are smaller scenes that are strung together to make up a longer story. If you divide your story into a few short episodes, then you want suggestive detail within the episodes, but you want to hurry over the transitions between them. Think of episodes as pearls on a string. Make the pearls fully orbed, keep the string stringy. The reader dwells in the episode, but he or she needs to be oriented to them, and that is the function of the transitions. As with the description, point of view is important. What position is the story being told from? Another way of talking about this is to talk about the story's narrator. The narrator is not the writer, but the consciousness through which the story is told. Sometimes the story is told in third person, which means that everyone is referred to as he or she or they. Sometimes, however, it is told in first person, which means that the narrator refers to himself as I and is actually involved in the story. Not all narrators are reliable. The more sophisticated narratives become, the more problematic is the narrator. When the narrator tells the story in first person, but details in the story led the reader to suspect that narrator is not reliable, the result is irony. Irony is a narrative condition in which the reader and writer share a common judgmental attitude towards the narrator, or when the reader knows more than the narrator and the characters in the story. For this assignment, it is probably better to tell the story as straight as possible. Irony is hard to pull off successfully. If you want to experiment with narrative form, I would suggest that you start somewhere in the middle of things and then use flashbacks. Also work on putting in suggestive but not overwhelming details and dialogue. Try dividing your story into short episodes that build on each other. If you can pattern a sequence of events so that the story has some kind of climax, followed by a denouement, that is, a scene in which everything is worked out, you will have done more than many of us can. The purpose of an academic narrative essay should not be confused with the purpose of a narrative essay. Often termed as creative nonfiction, a narrative essay is considered to be a work of literature, the purpose of which is often to enlighten or entertain the reader. The purpose of an academic narrative essay is much more straightforward than creative nonfiction. Creative nonfiction is at heart a good story, although an academic narrative essay may use some of the literary elements of creative nonfiction such as pacing, dialogue, conflict, suspense and tension. Its intention is different. The academic narrative essay's purpose or goal is not so much to entertain as it is to convey in a clear, purposeful way the significance of the story being told. An academic narrative essay has a thesis in the first paragraph which communicates a dominant impression. In other words, it answers the unspoken question in the reader's mind. What is the point of the story being told? What is the dominant impression the writer is trying to illustrate to her or his reader? This is not the case with most pieces of literary writing, where purpose is often unstated and therefore the reader often guesses at the theme or thesis. Academic narrative writing should convey a dominant impression, but the real key to successfully writing in this mode is to convey the reason or significance of the story being told or described. The thesis and the introductory paragraph should communicate this dominant impression and the main purpose for this particular narrative story being told in essay form. However, an academic narrative descriptive essay will often employ literary techniques and devices to enhance the essay, but also to demonstrate clear supporting examples which help to highlight the significance of the thesis. These literary techniques include conflict, suspense and tension or plot, which helps to give the reader a frame of reference such as time passing. Anecdotes help to dramatize the writer's relationship with the subject. They also help to clarify the significance of the story to the reader. In short, in the academic narrative essay mode, these techniques are the support material of the essay, which helps to give depth and texture to the thesis or conclusion. An anecdote is defined by the literary terms and definitions in the following ways: a short narrative account of an amusing, unusual, revealing, or interesting event. A good anecdote has a single definite point, and the setting, dialogue, and characters are usually subordinate to the point of the story. Usually, the anecdote does not exist alone, but it is combined with other material such as expository essays or arguments. Writers may use anecdotes to clarify abstract points, to humanize individuals, or to create a memorable image in the reader's mind. In addition, anecdotes are events about significant incidents. The writer should try to have at least two comparable anecdotes. The purpose of having two comparable anecdotes is to demonstrate a clear relationship to the thesis which points to a significance. Moreover, an academic essay using this mode must have a focus. It should not be one long story that tells the reader everything. It is a significant center and focuses only on significant events of the narrative. As with creative writing, in academic narrative writing, it is often stronger to show and not tell the reader the majority of the story. The academic writer needs to be specific and use all of his or her senses in fully developing a vivid portrait of the anecdotes used in the essay. In addition, literary devices such as adding dialogue and using similes or metaphors helps to evoke strong mental images in the mind of the reader. Details are the specific answers to who, what, where, when, and how questions rose in the reader's mind as he or she engages with the essay. Writing a narrative composition appeals to one of the humankind's basic instincts, the impulse to share stories. Sometimes the aim of the storyteller is simply to entertain, to provide a moment of escape from the business of the day or the horrors of the night. But sometimes the aim of the storyteller is to instruct, to help others in their understanding of something. The best part of teaching in this way is that our listeners' natural resistance to heeding the words of others is low, and they are not always aware that they are being taught anything until it is too late. The skills needed to narrate a story well are not entirely the same as skills needed to write a good essay. Some wonderful short fiction writers are not particularly good essayists and vice versa. Still, it is useful to look at those elements that make up a good narrative and know how to apply what we learn toward making our essays as dramatic as possible, whenever that is appropriate. Review also the elements of personal essay, as the personal essay and the narrative essay have much in common. The ability to describe something convincingly will serve a writer well in any kind of essay situation. The most important thing to remember is that your job as writer is to show, not tell. If you say that the tree is beautiful, your readers are put on the defensive. Wait a minute, they think. We will be the judge of that. Show us a beautiful tree and we will believe. Do not rely then on adjectives that attempt to characterize a thing's attributes. Lovely, exciting, interesting. These are all useful adjectives in casual speech or when we are pointing to something that is lovely, but in careful writing they do not do much for us. In fact, they sound hollow. Let nouns and verbs do the work of description for you. With nouns, your readers will see. With verbs, they will feel. In the following paragraph taken from George Orwell's famous anti-imperialist essay, Shooting an Elephant, see how the act of shooting the elephant delivers immense emotional impact. What adjectives would you expect to find in a paragraph about an elephant? Big, grey, loud, enormous. Let us see if you find them here. Watch the verbs instead. Notice too another truth about description. When time is fleeting, slow down the prose. See how long the few seconds of the shooting can take in this paragraph. I start this paragraph. When I pulled the trigger, I did not hear the bang or feel the kick one never does when a shot goes home, but I heard the devilish roar of glee that went up from the crowd. In that instant, in too short a time, one would have thought, even for the bullet to get there, a mysterious, terrible change had come over the elephant. He neither stirred nor fell, but every line of his body had altered. He looked suddenly stricken, shrunken, immensely old, as though the frightful impact of the bullet had paralyzed him without knocking him down. At last, after what seemed a long time, it might have been 5 seconds, I dare say, he sagged flabbily to his knees. His mouth slobbered. An enormous senility seemed to have settled upon him. One could have imagined him thousands of years old. I fired again into the same spot. At the second shot, he did not collapse, but climbed with desperate slowness to his feet and stood weakly upright, with legs sagging and head drooping. I fired a third time. That was the shot that did for him. You could see the agony of it jolt his whole body and knock the last remnant of strength from his legs. But in falling, he seemed for a moment to rise, for as his hind legs collapsed beneath him, he seemed to tower upward like a huge rock toppling, his trunk reaching skywards like a tree. He trumpeted for the first and only time, and then down he came, his belly towards me, with a crash that seemed to shake the ground even where I lay. So, I have given you one example from an essay of George Orwell. Do not forget that the business of the essay is to make a point. In his essay, Orwell succeeds in portraying the horrors of an imperialist state, showing how the relationship between oppressed Burmese and the British oppressor is dehumanizing to both. So, to summarize, we have discussed various narrative writing techniques. We have learned that a narrative is a moving picture. Like description, narratives need to have a rich texture of details so that the reader is seeing, hearing, smelling and touching. The reader should experience the story, not simply hear it. We have talked about the importance of pace of the story and the point of view. We have also tried to differentiate between academic narrative and creative non-fiction. We have learned how anecdotes can liven up your narrative, and finally the use of picturesque language with the help of verbs and nouns. Thank you so much for watching.